Have you been dealing with a crazy ex? Is it driving you up the wall? If so, you'll want to stick around for this video. But before we dive in, please take a moment to subscribe to LilyTube and be sure to hit the bell for notifications. This video has been funded by Tether, an easier way to keep your loved ones intact. With superior tracking techniques and technology like never before, Tether takes being safe to a whole new level.
So how do we stay sane when our ex is crazy? Jeff, what do you think?
Well, you know, there's a word we like called shalom. It's the Hebrew word for peace, but it doesn't just mean peace in the sense that we understand that. It also means wholeness and restoration. So maintaining our shalom begins with understanding when we are what I like to call disrupted, when we're not in balance, when we're off, and when we're not in that peaceful state that we thrive best in. And if we learn to understand when we're not in that condition, we can then take steps to return to it. And you can do that through a variety of methods. You can pray, you can meditate, you can do other mindfulness techniques. You can go for a walk, you can exercise. There's lots of things you can do, but the first step is noticing whether you're in your shalom or not.
Another really great one is setting healthy boundaries. And we know a lot of people who have been through divorce and they are dealing with former spouses. And setting healthy boundaries is a really important one that most of them feel like they need support with. Well, and for those who may not be familiar with boundaries, the one thing that I think we all are a little bit inexperienced with when we first start setting boundaries is that we think that we need to say what other people need to do, which gives them all the power. But really, in setting healthy boundaries, we say what we're going to do in response to whatever people choose, because everyone has their agency and we can't rely on other people honoring our boundaries unless we set those healthy parameters on what we will do, how we will respond.
Let's suppose you've met someone in another state, Oregon, for example, and that person is gung-ho about your relationship and she decides to move here to Utah to be close to you, but you're a little nervous about that. Can you say, nope, you've got to stay in Oregon, you can't move here? Of course not. That's their decision. What you can say is, the fact that you move here from Oregon doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have a relationship. I'm still going to let things progress at a pace that I'm comfortable with. And I'm only going to give you one night a week or whatever boundary you choose to set on that. So when you set a boundary, it can't be a boundary, for example, for me to tell the person I'm dating, you have to study this many nights a week if you're going to school. A boundary is not for me to regulate another person. It is for me to avoid invasions into my space. I don't get to deprive someone else of their agency. I just get to preserve my own agency.
Yeah, it's about regulating ourselves. Another way of dealing with a crazy ex is to use emotional freedom technique, otherwise known as EFT. And there's a lot of really great material online, so I'm not going to go into it specifically, but we did have an EFT certified practitioner. Her name is Misty Love, and that LilyPod episode and even the interview will end up here on our YouTube channel. So you can check it out on LilyPod episode 116 or here on LilyTube.
Another example of where you might set a boundary is at your home. You might tell your former spouse, you cannot come into the home without knocking and without being welcomed into the home. You might, in some cases, if you've got somebody that you think is a little dangerous, say, I'm sorry, I will deliver the kids to the porch, but you can't come inside. Even if he or she lived there at one time. Sometimes we have to set a boundary and say, if you come in when I am not here or when you haven't rung the bell and been admitted in, I'm gonna have to call the police. That would be an example of a boundary. Now, a boundary that you couldn't really set, you don't have a right to set a boundary about what happens at their house. You could say, I'm setting a boundary. You have to start the kids' homework at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Not a boundary that you're really able to set. You can't set a boundary for somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, and even the boundary you set for your own home, they could not honor your boundary. In which case, then you decide how you're going to respond to that. You might call the cops. You might change your locks. There's lots of things that we can do in response to people who don't honor our boundaries. So moving on to the next phase of this video, we want to ask the question, is our ex really crazy? Is it really true? Can we absolutely know for certain that they are crazy? How do we react to the thought that they're crazy? How would we be without the thought that they're crazy? What truth can we find in each of these turnaround statements? Maybe my ex isn't crazy. Maybe my ex thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am crazy. Now, some of these questions might seem absurd, but really think about them, because we can usually find truth in other perspectives. And even the thought that our ex is crazy, it really is just a thought. And it's one that we can keep if it serves us, or we could shift it to something else. We could reframe it if it serves us better to think something else about our former spouse.
Kate, what if your ex really is certifiably crazy? Now, I don't think that's a diagnosis that any psychologist or psychiatrist would make, but let's suppose, for the sake of discussion, that it is a provable fact. Well, then, the answer is boundaries, as we've talked about. We can still act and think of how we're going to act in advance.
What is a boundary and what is not? A boundary is not about demanding others do things for us or behave in a certain way. A boundary is only about what you are going to do. It does not cross boundaries to have a difference of opinion as long as you allow the other person to believe what they choose.
You don't need to be angry to set a boundary. In fact, it's better if you're not angry. A boundary is not a brick wall. Now, examples of boundaries, in addition to what we've said, is if you criticize me when I share my feelings, I will not share them with you in the future. Another example might be, I'm comfortable holding hands, but I'm not ready to kiss you yet. Another might be, I work at 7 a.m. tomorrow, so I need you to leave by 10 p.m. so I can get enough sleep. One more, I see that you want to blame me for what happened, but I will not accept the blame.
I am hungry. I need to get something to eat. Another would be, I do not wish to discuss this in public. Let's wait until we are in private.
I know we disagree, but I'm not going to participate in a conversation if you belittle me. Related one, if you yell at me or call me names, I will leave the house.
If you threaten me, I will call the police. So how do we stay sane besides all of the things we already suggested? Stay in your own lane. If we focus on what we can control and accept what we can't, that's where we have the most power when dealing with an ex that we might consider to be crazy. One little reference for those of you who'd like to dive deeper, on LilyPod episode 45, we have an episode called the Serenity Prayer, and that goes into that accepting the things we can't change and focusing on those things we can. And we hope this video gave you lots of ideas of how you can effectively deal with a crazy ex. For all of you who are practicing healthy boundaries, we would love to hear your comments and thoughts about boundaries and what you have found that works for you in dealing with your exes.
And remember that any time is a great time for more love in your life. Thank you for watching.